It was the courtroom speech that ended the Roloff empire forever and left Matt and Caryn completely humiliated in front of the world. The sound of the gavel didn't just signal the end of a legal battle. It sounded like the final nail in the coffin of a legacy that had taken decades to build, but only a few years of greed to destroy. For years, fans have speculated, argued, and theorized about what really went down behind the scenes of the farm negotiation. But what allegedly happened in that courtroom wasn't just a business transaction gone wrong. It was a moral reckoning. When the dust settled, Matt Roloff, the man who always prided himself on being the ultimate deal-maker, the visionary, the one in control, was reportedly left trembling, staring at a judge who saw right through the facade. And Caryn, the woman often accused by the public of pulling the strings, she was left with nowhere to hide. This wasn't a script written for TLC cameras. There were no producers to cut away when things got awkward. This was raw, unfiltered legal justice. And according to exclusive theories and insider reports coming out of Oregon, the verdict was more brutal than anyone could have predicted. If you have been waiting to see the curtain pulled back on the real dynamics of Roloff Farms, and if you believe that the truth eventually always comes to light, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It helps us get these deep dive investigations out to more people who deserve to know the truth. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because as more details about this shocking legal showdown leak out, you are not going to want to miss a single update. We are tracking this story closer than anyone else, and trust me, the fallout is just beginning. To understand the magnitude of this courtroom explosion, we have to look past the edited episodes of Little People, Big World. We have to look at the murmurs that have been circulating in legal circles and among those close to the production. The narrative we were sold on TV was that Matt offered Amy a buyout. Negotiations stalled, and eventually things just didn't work out, leading to the sale of the North Side. But insiders have long whispered that this version of events is a sanitized fairy tale compared to the cutthroat reality. The theory that has gained the most traction recently, and the one that reportedly landed them in front of this judge, is that the initial appraisal of the farm wasn't just low. It was allegedly a calculated fabrication, a sham. Imagine the scene. A tense courtroom in Oregon, far away from the charming pumpkin patch aesthetic. On one side, you have Amy Roloff, a woman who spent 30 years building a life, a family, and a business, only to feel pushed out of her own history. On the other side, Matt and Caryn, sitting together, perhaps confident, perhaps arrogant, believing that their business savvy would once again win the day. They have always controlled the narrative. Matt is the master of the spin. But in a court of law, spin doesn't work. Evidence does. And this is where the story takes a dark turn for the couple. According to new information surfacing from sources familiar with the proceedings, the crux of the case hinged on a document that Matt and Caryn thought was watertight, an independent appraisal of the farm's assets. But Amy's legal team, described by onlookers as absolute sharks who smelled blood in the water, didn't just accept the paper at face value. They dug. And what they found reportedly shocked the jury. The theory is that the appraiser wasn't as independent as claimed. There are whispers of a paper trail, of emails and communications that suggested the parameters for the appraisal were manipulated to artificially suppress the value of Amy's share. This is what legal experts call bad faith, but to the average person, it looks a lot like theft. The atmosphere in the courtroom during the cross-examination was described as suffocating. When Amy's lawyer took the floor, he didn't scream. He didn't shout. He methodically dismantled the defense piece by piece. The reports describe a moment where Caryn was called to the stand. Now, we know Caryn is sharp. She managed the farm for years. She knows the books. But on the stand, under oath, with the threat of perjury hanging over her head, the confident manager reportedly crumbled. The lawyer allegedly presented a timeline of meetings, dates and times that Caryn claimed were casual check-ins, but which aligned perfectly with the drastic devaluation of the property assets. It was the moment that sham appraisal was exposed. The lawyer reportedly held up the document and asked a simple question about the methodology used to value the wedding barn and the pumpkin patch infrastructure. It was a technical question, but the answer revealed everything. Caryn stuttered. She looked at Matt, but Matt couldn't help her. In that moment, the jury wasn't looking at a reality TV star. They were looking at someone who had allegedly conspired to cheat a partner out of millions. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Viewers have always suspected that Caryn had too much influence over the farm's finances, but seeing it laid out in a legal setting, with charts and emails backing it up, was a revelation. Matt's turn on the stand was reportedly even worse. Known for his ability to talk his way out of anything, Matt tried to charm the court. He tried to frame the lowball offer as market reality and protecting the legacy, but the judge wasn't having it. Every time Matt tried to pivot to a monologue about his vision for the farm, the judge cut him off, demanding yes or no answers. For a man like Matt, who thrives on control, being silenced and forced to answer for his actions was visible torture. His face reportedly turned a shade of crimson that the cameras have never caught. He was losing control of the room, and he knew it. The climax of the evidentiary phase came when Amy's team brought in their own forensic accountant. This wasn't a local real estate agent guessing prices. This was a financial auditor who had combed through years of the farm's ledgers. This expert witness testified that the discrepancy between the farm's true value and what Matt offered Amy wasn't a rounding error. It was a chasm. We're talking about a difference of millions of dollars. The expert used words like deliberate suppression and fiduciary breach. The jury, consisting of 12 ordinary citizens, sat in rapt attention. You could see the shift in their body language. At the start of the trial, they might have been starstruck. By the end of the forensic testimony, they looked disgusted. When the defense rested, the air in the room had changed. The confidence that Matt and Caryn walked in with had evaporated. They were seen whispering furiously to their legal counsel, their hushed voices sharp and panicked. The narrative of the benevolent ex-husband helping his wife move on had been shredded. What was left was a picture of greed, a picture of two people who thought they were smarter than everyone else, who thought they could manipulate the numbers and the people around them without consequence. The jury deliberation was expected to take days. Complex financial fraud cases usually do. There are mountains of documents to review, intent to prove, and numbers to crunch. Matt and Caryn likely hoped for a long deliberation, a hung jury, or at least a compromise verdict. They retreated to a private holding room, perhaps trying to convince themselves that they had done enough to muddy the waters. But they were wrong. The jury was out for just a few hours. In the legal world, a quick verdict is almost always a death sentence for the defense. It means the evidence was overwhelming. It means there was no debate, no confusion, no holdouts defending the accused. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict so quickly, a hush fell over the hallway. Matt reportedly looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide with genuine fear for the first time. Caryn went pale, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a shield. They walked back into the courtroom, not as the rulers of Roloff Farms, but as defendants awaiting their fate. The walk to the defense table must have felt like the longest journey of their lives. Every step echoed on the floorboards. Amy was already seated, looking straight ahead, calm, composed. She wasn't gloating. She was simply waiting. She knew the truth, and now 12 strangers knew it too. As everyone took their seats, the judge entered. This judge was not known for theatrics. He was a stern, no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for detesting white-collar arrogance. Throughout the trial, he had remained mostly impassive, intervening only to keep the proceedings on track. But as he took the bench this time, something was different. Observers noted a simmering intensity in his eyes. He didn't just look like a man about to read a form, he looked like a man who was angry. He looked at the jury foreperson and nodded. The verdict was read. "We find for the plaintiff, Amy Roloff, on all counts." The words hung in the air. Fraud, breach of contract, bad faith. Every count was a checkmark against Matt and Caryn. But the verdict was just the beginning. Usually, after the verdict is read, the judge thanks the jury and schedules a sentencing or damages hearing. But this judge didn't dismiss anyone. He didn't bang the gavel to close the session. Instead, he shuffled his papers, stacked them neatly to the side, and clasped his hands together. He leaned forward, looming over the bench, and fixed his gaze directly on Matt and Caryn. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. The judge took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't the monotone of a bureaucrat. It was a low rumble that vibrated through the room. He told the court reporter to keep typing because he wanted every word of what he was about to say on the official record. He stated that in his 20 years on the bench, he had seen business disputes, he had seen divorces, and he had seen incompetence. But what he had witnessed in this trial, he said, was something entirely different. He endorsed the jury's findings, validating every suspicion Amy and the audience ever had. But then he went further. He began a speech that would become legendary in the halls of that courthouse. He wasn't just ruling on the law. He was addressing the character of the people standing before him. He spoke of the responsibility of majority shareholders, the sacred trust between business partners, and the moral obligation one has to the mother of their children. Matt shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the table, unable to meet the judge's eyes. Caryn stared blankly, as if frozen in shock. The judge's voice began to rise. He talked about the sham appraisal. He called it an insult to the court and an insult to the intelligence of everyone involved. He described the scheme not as a savvy business move, but as a clumsy, transparent attempt at robbery. He used words that stripped away all the celebrity glamour and left only the ugly truth of the matter. He was just getting started. The setup was complete. The evidence was undeniable. The jury had spoken. But now, it was the judge's turn to deliver the final blow. A blow that would target not just their bank accounts, but their egos, their reputations, and their entire reign over the farm. This wasn't just a legal ruling anymore. It was about to become a public dismantling. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the HVAC system, a low drone that seemed to amplify the tension rather than mask it. The judge had paused, letting the weight of the guilty verdict settle over the defense table like a heavy blanket. Matt Roloff, a man who built an entire brand on his ability to negotiate, to manage, and to overcome, sat frozen. Beside him, Caryn looked small, her eyes darting between the judge and the exit signs, perhaps realizing for the first time that there was no producer here to call cut and let them reset the scene. This was the twist that no one saw coming. Everyone expected a standard ruling, a calculation of assets, a division of property, perhaps a dry lecture on corporate responsibility. But what happened next was described by legal observers as a judicial dismantling, a scathing rebuke that stripped away every layer of defense Matt and Caryn had carefully constructed over the years. The judge leaned forward, his eyes locking directly onto Matt's. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was calm, controlled, and utterly devastating. He began by addressing the concept of fiduciary duty, a term that sounds dry in a textbook, but in that courtroom became a weapon. He told Matt that as the majority shareholder and the manager of the farm's operations, he held a position of trust. He wasn't just a business owner, he was the steward of a shared asset. And then the judge dropped the hammer. He declared that Matt's actions regarding the appraisal and the buyout offer were not merely negligent or sloppy. He called them a blatant and calculated act of bad faith. Those words, bad faith, rang out in the courtroom. In the legal world, this is one of the most damning accusations a judge can make. It means you didn't just make a mistake. It means you lied. It means you cheated on purpose. The judge reportedly referenced a specific piece of evidence that had been introduced late in the trial, a series of internal communications that the defense had fought hard to suppress. According to the theories circulating among insiders, these documents allegedly showed Matt and Caryn discussing the valuation of the farm months before the official appraisal, throwing out numbers that were shockingly lower than market value, effectively setting a target for the appraiser to hit. The judge held up a sheaf of papers, shaking them slightly for emphasis. He noted that the independent appraisal matched these internal target numbers almost to the dollar. He called it statistical impossibility and orchestrated deception. He didn't stop there. Turning his gaze to Caryn, the judge addressed her role. While she wasn't a shareholder in the same way, the judge highlighted her involvement as instrumental. He dismantled the narrative that she was just a supportive girlfriend or an employee following orders. He described her as a willing participant in a scheme designed to disenfranchise Amy. This was the moment the villain edit became real life. The judge used a phrase that sent shockwaves through the gallery: constructive fraud. He explained that, while they may not have worn masks and robbed a bank, the manipulation of the asset values to squeeze out a minority partner, especially one who was a former spouse and mother of the family, amounted to the same thing morally and legally. He characterized their behavior as predatory. Matt reportedly tried to interject at this point, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He started to stammer something about market volatility and legacy costs, the same buzzwords he's used on the show for seasons to justify his decisions. But the judge silenced him with a single sharp raise of his hand. "Mr. Roloff," the judge reportedly boomed, his voice finally rising to match the gravity of his words. "You are not on a television set. You are in a court of law, and in this court, facts matter more than narratives." The rebuke was so stinging that Matt physically recoiled, sinking lower into his chair. It was a total loss of power for a man who is addicted to control. The judge then moved to the specific legal categorization of their actions, labeling it a textbook case of minority shareholder oppression. This was the legal twist that changed everything. By invoking oppression, the judge wasn't just talking about money anymore. He was talking about rights. He was saying that Matt had used his power to bully Amy, to force her into a corner where she had to sell at a discount or risk losing everything. The judge described the timeline of events: the pressure campaigns, the eviction notices disguised as business correspondence, the public comments made to disparage Amy's contribution to the farm. He wove all these separate incidents into a single, ugly tapestry of harassment. He told the court that what Matt and Caryn had done was not business. It was personal warfare waged with balance sheets. Amy, sitting at the plaintiff's table, remained stoic, but sources say she was gripping her hands together so tightly her knuckles were white. For years, she had been gaslit. She had been told she was crazy, that she was emotional, that she didn't understand business. Now, a high-ranking judge was validating everything she had felt in her gut. She wasn't crazy. She was being robbed. The judge looked at Amy briefly, his expression softening just a fraction, acknowledging the ordeal she had been dragged through. He stated that the court takes a particularly dim view of individuals who weaponize the legal system to abuse their former partners. Then came the pivot to the financial climax. The judge shuffled his papers again, organizing the final order. The air in the room grew thin. Everyone knew money was going to change hands, but the scale of it was still a mystery. Matt and Caryn likely braced themselves for a correction, perhaps a few $100,000, maybe covering Amy's legal fees. They were still operating under the delusion that this was a standard dispute. They were wrong. The judge began to read the financial judgment. First, he addressed the value of the shares. He completely discarded the defense's appraisal, tossing it aside as worthless paper. Instead, he adopted the valuation provided by Amy's forensic experts, a valuation that accounted for the true potential of the wedding business, the pumpkin patch revenue, and the undeveloped acreage. He ordered that Matt Roloff pay Amy Roloff the difference between his lowball offer and the true value. The number he read out was staggering: $4 million. A gasp reportedly rippled through the few spectators allowed in the room. $4 million. That wasn't just a correction, that was a fortune. That was enough to cripple the farm's liquidity. Matt's jaw dropped. He looked at his lawyer in panic, realizing that the deal he thought he had won years ago was now costing him everything. But the judge wasn't done. And this is where the story turns into a legal thriller of the highest order. However, the judge continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, compensatory damages are not sufficient in this case. He explained that simply making Matt pay what he owed wasn't enough because it didn't address the intent. It didn't punish malice. If Matt just had to pay the correct amount, he had lost nothing but the profit he tried to steal. The judge wanted to send a message. He wanted to make sure that neither Matt nor Caryn nor anyone else in that jurisdiction would ever attempt such a brazen scheme again. He looked over his glasses at the couple. The court finds that the defendants acted with malice and a specific intent to defraud. Therefore, punitive damages are warranted. Punitive damages, the two scariest words a defendant can hear in a civil trial. These are damages designed to punish. They are not covered by insurance. They are not tax-deductible business expenses. They are a penalty for bad behavior. The judge declared that to ensure the message was received loud and clear, he was leveling an additional penalty. He ordered Matt and Caryn to pay an extra $1 million in punitive damages. And then, the final twist of the knife. The judge specified that these punitive damages were joint and several and were to be paid personally. This meant they couldn't drain the farm's business accounts to pay this fine. They couldn't take out a loan against the LLC for this portion. This money had to come from their personal savings, their private stashes, their own pockets. $5 million, the judge summarized, payable immediately. The impact of this ruling cannot be overstated. $5 million is a life-altering amount of money, even for reality TV stars. It threatens the very existence of the empire they tried so hard to consolidate. Matt sat there, stunned into silence, his face drained of all color. The arrogance was gone. The visionary was gone. In his place was a man who had just been handed a bill for his own hubris. Caryn reportedly put a hand to her mouth, a stifled sob escaping. This wasn't just a loss. It was a humiliation. The judge had essentially called them con artists on the public record and fined them $1 million for their trouble. The judge closed his file. He didn't offer any parting wisdom. He didn't wish them luck. He simply stated, "Court is adjourned," and banged the gavel. That sound, the sharp crack of wood on wood, echoed like a gunshot. It signaled the end of the Roloff reign as we knew it. The power dynamic had shifted violently and permanently. Amy Roloff, the woman they tried to push out, was now the creditor holding the keys to their financial future. As the judge swept out of the room, the reality of the situation began to set in. The $4 million was justice for the past. The $1 million was punishment for the personality. It was a complete and total vindication of Amy Roloff. But the drama didn't end when the judge left the bench. In fact, the most intense moments were just about to happen. The fallout from a verdict like this is immediate and visceral. We have to analyze what this $5 million judgment really means for the farm. Insider theories suggest that Matt doesn't have that kind of liquid cash sitting around. This judgment puts the farm in immediate peril. It likely means he has to sell assets, real assets, not just parcels of land he doesn't want. It puts the big house, the dream home he's building, in jeopardy. It puts his retirement plans with Caryn on ice. The judge knew this. This wasn't an accidental sum. It was calculated to hurt. It was calculated to dismantle the power structure that Matt used to control his family. And consider the psychological blow. Matt Roloff has spent his life proving people wrong, proving he can do things his way. This judge looked at his way and called it fraud. For a narcissist, and let's be honest, many fans have labeled him as such, this is a wound that will never heal. He was outsmarted by Amy's lawyers and outclassed by the legal system. He walked into that courtroom thinking he was the smartest guy in the room, and he walked out $5 million poorer and publicly shamed. Caryn's position is even more precarious. The judgment linking her personally to the punitive damages is a catastrophe. She isn't a Roloff by blood. She doesn't have the decades of TLC checks that Matt has. Being on the hook for a share of $1 million fine changes the dynamic of their relationship instantly. It's no longer just a romance. It's a financial liability. Did she sign up for this? When she started working at the farm, did she ever imagine she would be sitting in a courtroom being told she owes a fortune for oppression? The tension between them in that moment must have been electric. The judge didn't just break their bank accounts. He likely broke the trust between them. How do you look at your partner after a disaster of this magnitude and not wonder, is this your fault? The climax of the script isn't just the money, it's the shift in the universe of Little People, Big World. For years, the script has been poor Matt trying to keep the farm together. The judge ripped that script up. The new script is Matt and Caryn, the schemers who got caught. The poetic justice is undeniable. They tried to save money by cheating Amy, and in the end, it cost them exponentially more than if they had just been fair from the start. Greed, as the judge effectively ruled, is an expensive hobby. As the courtroom began to clear, the atmosphere was heavy. Amy's team was packing up, smiles exchanged but kept professional. There was no high-fiving, just the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. On the other side, Matt and Caryn remained seated for a long time, perhaps too shell-shocked to stand up. They had to walk out of that courthouse, past the cameras, past the reporters, and eventually back to the farm that now felt less like a kingdom and more like a mortgage. The judge's fury had burned the Roloff empire to the ground, and now they had to go home and live in the ashes. Matt and Caryn left the courtroom in a chilling silence that spoke louder than any scream. As they pushed through the heavy oak doors, the reality of the judge's $5 million decree hit them with the force of a physical blow. Inside the courtroom, they had to maintain a veneer of composure. But out in the hallway, away from the judge's piercing gaze, the facade crumbled. Onlookers described Matt as looking visibly aged, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a legacy that had just been legally dismantled. Caryn, usually the picture of organized confidence, walked a few paces behind him, clutching her phone as if waiting for a lifeline that would never ring. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't even look at each other. The air between them was frigid, charged with the kind of resentment that only comes when two people realize they have mutually assured their own destruction. Behind them, Amy Roloff exited the courtroom with her legal team. The contrast could not have been more stark. Amy wasn't celebrating. She wasn't high-fiving her lawyers or making a scene. She walked with the quiet dignity of a woman who had been gaslit for years and had finally been told by a court of law that she was right all along. She looked relieved, light, unburdened. For the first time in a decade, the shadow of Matt's control was gone. She didn't need to say a word to Matt as she passed him. The verdict had said it all. The transfer of wealth the judge ordered wasn't just a transaction, it was a restoration of power. The walk to the parking lot was a gauntlet of shame. Usually, Matt loves the cameras. He thrives on the attention of the show, controlling the angles, producing the narrative. But today, there were no producers to protect him. There were no retakes. If there were cameras there, they were capturing the raw, unedited footage of a man who had gambled his reputation and lost everything. Insider reports suggest that Matt tried to hurry to the car, ignoring the few questions shouted by local reporters. He looked like a man trying to outrun a storm, but the storm was already inside his head. The car ride back to the farm is where the story truly turns dark. According to sources close to the family who have pieced together the aftermath, the drive was the loudest silence you've ever heard. For the first 20 minutes, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. But as they got closer to the property that was now effectively mortgaged to pay Amy, the dam reportedly broke. The theory among those who know Matt best is that his narcissism couldn't handle the blame. He couldn't accept that he had made a mistake. He couldn't accept that his strategy was flawed. So he did what he always does. He found a scapegoat. And the only person in the car with him was Caryn. It started with a murmur, a passive-aggressive comment about the legal strategy. Then it escalated. Witnesses speculate that Matt began to unleash his fury on Caryn, blaming her for the amateurish mistake regarding the appraisal. He allegedly accused her of pushing too hard, of being too greedy with the numbers, of convincing him that Amy would just roll over and take the lowball offer. "You said she wouldn't fight," he reportedly snapped, his voice rising in the confined space of the SUV. "You said you could handle the books." Caryn, who had just been hit with a personal liability for punitive damages, likely didn't take this lying down. The ride turned into a verbal war zone. She reportedly fired back, reminding Matt that he was the one who insisted on the aggressive timeline, that he was the one who wanted to squeeze every penny out of the Northside sale. This wasn't just a lover's quarrel. This was the implosion of a business partnership. The trust that had been the foundation of their relationship was shattered by the judge's gavel. How do you look at your partner the same way when their decisions just cost you $1 million personally? The dynamic shifted instantly from us against the world to you versus me. By the time they pulled up to the gates of Roloff Farms, the mood was toxic. The farm, usually a symbol of Matt's success, now looked different. The pumpkins, the castle, the wedding barn, everything they drove past was no longer just an asset. It was a debt. It was collateral. The judge's ruling meant that liquidating these assets might be the only way to pay Amy. The dream home Matt is building, that might have to go. The legacy he wanted to leave for the grandkids, it was now earmarked for the ex-wife he tried to shortchange. As they exited the vehicle, staff members reportedly kept their distance, sensing the volcanic anger radiating from Matt. He stormed into the office, slamming the door, leaving Caryn standing alone in the driveway. It was a poetic mirror to the way Amy had been left alone so many times in the past. But this time, Caryn wasn't the victor. She was the collateral damage of Matt's hubris. The fallout in the days following the verdict has been catastrophic. Insider theories suggest that Matt is scrambling to find the liquidity to pay the judgment without selling the farm entirely, but the numbers don't look good. The $5 million penalty is a massive hit. It wipes out years of profit. It likely drains the reserves meant for future seasons of the show. There are even whispers that TLC is reconsidering the direction of the series. After all, it's hard to market a show about a wholesome farm family when the patriarch has just been legally branded a fraudster who oppressed his ex-wife. The villain edit isn't an edit anymore. It's the legal record. And what about the kids? Zach and Jeremy, who have had their own public feuds with Matt over the farm negotiations, are reportedly feeling a mix of sadness and vindication. For years, they were told they didn't understand business, that they weren't capable of running the farm. Now, seeing their father reprimanded for bad faith and incompetence by a judge proves that their instincts were right. They dodged a bullet. If they had bought into the farm under Matt's terms, they might have been dragged into this legal quagmire themselves. The verdict has likely severed the final threads of trust between Matt and his sons. The Roloff empire isn't being passed down, it's being paid out. But the real winner here, the only winner, is Amy. This judgment isn't just about the money, although $5 million is a life-changing sum. It's about validation. It's about every time she was told she was being emotional or difficult during the divorce. The judge confirmed that her intuition was sharper than Matt's schemes. She gets to walk away clean. She has her husband, Chris. She has her cooking. She has her community. And now she has the capital to do whatever she wants. She doesn't need the farm. She doesn't need Matt's approval. She has conquered the giant that tried to crush her. The image of Matt and Caryn sitting in that house, surrounded by the silence of their defeat, is the final lingering shot of this saga. They have the farm, but they lost the war. They have each other, but for how long? The pressure of a multi-million-dollar debt has crushed stronger relationships than theirs. The judge didn't just end a lawsuit, he ended an era. The arrogance that fueled the roll-off negotiation tactics has been extinguished. As the sun sets over the pumpkin patch, the long shadows seem to spell out the end of the story. Matt Roloff, the man who built a world for little people, ultimately made himself look small in the eyes of the law. He tried to rewrite history to suit his bank account, but the truth has a way of coming out, especially when there's a paper trail. The empire is crumbling, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. So we have to ask the ultimate question. After years of watching Amy being pushed aside, talked down to, and undervalued. Does this feel like the ending she deserved? Is a $5 million penalty enough to make up for the years of stress and manipulation? The judge certainly thought so. He sent a message that will ring in the ears of reality TV stars and business owners for years to come. You cannot build a legacy on a foundation of fraud. What do you think? Did the judge go far enough? Do Matt and Caryn deserve to pay every single cent of that $5 million personally? Or do you think the punishment was too harsh? There are rumors that they might appeal, but legal experts say the evidence of bad faith is so overwhelming that an appeal would be a waste of money they don't have. This looks like the end of the road. I want to hear from you. Did the judge's $5 million penalty finally give Amy the justice she deserves? Or should the penalty have been even higher to truly punish the intent? Let's get a conversation going in the comments section below. If you think justice was served, drop a justice in the comments right now. And if you think Matt got off easy, let me know why. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this deep dive into the real story behind the headlines, and subscribe to the channel for more exclusive updates. We will be tracking the sale of the farm assets and the status of Matt and Caryn's relationship as this financial bomb detonates. You won't want to miss what happens next. Until then, remember, the truth always wins. Thanks for watching.